Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for parents, especially taking the time to come in to this event. It's a really useful chance for us all to touch base, just to sort of make you as aware as I can of some of the principles that we have in how we approach things, and B, to really emphasize some of the key dates and things that you need to be aware of, especially as the sixth form gets larger. There are many people with stakeholders in this next step, whether that be university or something else. So it's really important that you know some of the deadlines as well. I will go through some of the principles, some of the things that perhaps as parents you might not know about the university landscape in 2023. I will try and be a little bit anecdotal as we go along, just because I think it fleshes things out. So I'm going to attempt not to do death by PowerPoint too much. If you've got any questions, we do have time at the end, but also feel free to raise your hand if you're dying to ask me a question at a particular time, so you don't forget it later. Okay, so the key kind of thing to be aware of is really this flow chart in terms of what goes on over the next 2 terms especially. So this term, researching universities and courses, visiting where possible, and some people aren't here today because they're at a university, which is the best reason to miss this, and open virtual days, virtual open days, different way around, are also a really important part of the process. Setting up a UCAS account, you're going to do that next week with Mrs. Catley. Do you guys need to sit apart from each other? You're going to giggle your way through my presentation. You need to make a bit of a long list of decisions. So courses that you want to apply for, but also universities. That sense of a long list, you might not have decided by the end of this term, but the idea is to have a long list. Knowledge gained regarding entry requirements and courses. And I'll come to that in a little bit more detail later. Over the summer holidays, wider reading and research into chosen courses and shortlisting options. Again, really, really important that you're doing that research. Whatever subject you're applying for, ultimately, you should be a little bit more of an expert in many ways than I am about what the universities that you're applying for want from you. And indeed, what the courses are going to look like. Really important over the summer, and it's really important that you as parents know this, we do expect a first draft of the personal statement to be completed. That first draft often isn't very good, and that's okay. But that's an important thing to know that your child should be doing over the course of the summer. So autumn, that's then when we start redrafting personal statements and of course sending applications through UCAS. So that's next term. After that, so from Christmas time, hopefully you're not massively thinking about UCAS. You've done the legwork, you've filled out the forms, you've written your personal statement. You're then focusing on getting the grades that you need to get. During the course of the spring term, you'll be receiving your offers. And now it varies, and I want to talk a little bit, and I'll pick up on it later, but I'll mention it now. There are some ways in which universities are doing marketing, which I find problematic and somewhat inappropriate. A lot of universities will make an offer quite early. So if you apply in November, they will make an offer in December. And from about January time, even sometimes February, they will say, if you make us your firm choice now in February, we will drop a couple of grades from your offer and you can have first choice of accommodation. And if you wait as late as May to apply for accommodation at our university, we can't guarantee you a place in student halls. I find this really problematic because many of the most competitive universities, such as, I think I'm right in saying UCL, I think I'm right in saying Exeter, a lot of those don't even start to look at applications until January the 25th. They don't even look at any. And they will look at those applications in one go, and a lot of them don't make their offers until May because they don't have to. And suddenly you have a student who, and I have to say, not to sort of be rude about a particular institution, but Falmouth is, in my experience, quite bad for it. So a student might have applied for Exeter University and have a decent chance of getting in, and they might have applied also for Falmouth University. Falmouth has found a way to pressure them to just withdraw their application from Exeter with that before getting an offer in order to secure their accommodation places. So there is a bit of a move amongst universities to say, we think there should be a single date for replies. All universities should just reply with their offers on this date. And then they can't play these funny little marketing games. My personal advice as a general principle is kind of put your fingers in your ears and don't worry too much about it. Now, that depends on an individual by individual basis. Certainly, it's been the case I've had students who've applied to Birmingham University and they said, oh, Birmingham will give me an unconditional offer for music. I think it was music, if I make them my first choice. Oh, but I think I'd rather go to such and such university. And in that particular student's case, my advice was bite Birmingham's hand off, because you are actually going to struggle to get those grades for either of those places. So if Birmingham's giving you an unconditional offer, congratulations, you're going to a very nice university. In other cases, my advice would be ignore Birmingham. That's a marketing tactic. Do what's right for you. But I will always tailor what advice I give to the individual, but try to be a little bit tough with these marketing tactics because they're really inappropriate. And I personally, I don't like it at all. I think it's quite wrong. So in the spring, once you've got all your offers, you can reply with your firm and your insurance choice. I'll go more into that later. There is a late May deadline. Hello.
In terms of the first choice question.
Yes.
Is that something that they normally made aware? So the university know that.
Yes, they will know if they're a first choice or an what firm choice or an insurance choice. Yes.
And they don't have to pull out from the university.
I'll explain this later, but yes, when you've chosen your firm and your insurance, all of your other offers then go in the bin. I will. There's a specialized slide on that one. I'm saying it's a late May deadline. I'm actually lying. It's probably June. But if I say May, you'll actually apply by May, and I'll talk a little bit about that effect later. Summer term, that's when you're taking your final exams, your final assessments. Okay, and of course, August 2024. That's when you have results announced and results day, of which more later. So the key staff that you need to be aware of. I'm Alex Mew. I'm the university's advisor. I put first names in case you want to email any of us, and the email is alex.mew, and the same pattern for everyone else. I'm the university's advisor, so I kind of oversee the whole process. I also send things off. If you're applying for a UCAS, you cannot bypass me. You cannot say in January, and this has happened, you cannot say in January, oh no, I'm not applying to university, and then whimsically apply without mentioning it to me. You have to tell me, because what happens when you send the application off is it sits there, and it sits there until I send it off. So it's really important that everyone is keeping me very much in the loop, but I am by no means the only person involved in this process. So Naomi Catley is going to be the head of careers next year. That's right. I'm sorry. I checked that with Mr. It's still going to be. I checked this. Right. I checked this with Mr. Balderson today, and he said yes. Right. I apologize. Right. Yes. Right. Okay. I did. I tried to get that right. I apologize. I'll sort that out later. But she has taken, Mrs. Catley in any case, has done the careers sessions this year with you all. I will be taking career sessions next year. But again, if you want to speak to Mrs. Catley, you know her well. She has already advised you. Absolutely, she is still part of this process. Mrs. Ash has been and will continue to be the head of careers and also the head of sixth form. So that's the non-university routes. But again, we're all stakeholders in this. So if you're applying to a non-university route, it doesn't mean that I just wash my hands of you. You will be seeing me every week, and we will be talking about all of the different options. Sally Price is the deputy head of sixth form, and of course, a person that lots of you are used to talking to. Mr. Balderson is the deputy head academic. So especially when it comes to grades on results day, he's quite a key player. And then tutors, subject teachers and house staff are just very normal people for you to talk to. And again, subject teachers, if you're applying for something to do with art, I've overseen loads of art applications. I've got loads of insight, but it doesn't, my insight is missing what your art teachers can give you. It's really important that you're sort of talking to as many people as you can. So I've got a slide of key dates. I will share this with you, but someone wants to really be aware of is September the 4th, just before term. That's when you should have your first draft of personal statement completed. October the 15th for your super competitive things. Oxbridge, medicine, dentistry, veterinary sciences. Okay, that's October the 15th. That's your early deadline application. November the 15th is the nominal school deadline for all applications. So in my heart, I like to believe that we all get it done and we're finished a couple of weeks before the end of term. Okay. It's not quite how it sometimes goes, but that's our nominal deadline. So as parents, if I start getting frustrated, you might hear me saying on November the 16th, well, they have missed the deadline. In 2024, January the 25th, and it sometimes varies a little bit year on year, so this may be wrong, it may be subject to change. That's the final true deadline for all applications. If you apply after that deadline, they do not have to consider your application. You can still apply, but they might not read it. May, and as I say, I'm lying, it's probably June, but it used to be early May, it's then moved to late May, and now it's early June. That's the final offers or rejections from university received, as long as you've applied to them in time. And then, so in May or earlier, that is when you choose your firm and insurance place, and August is results day. So, school procedures and pupil responsibilities. Summer term discussions with staff. Application workshops, which we're doing on Mondays at the moment, personalized advice. I am having one-to-ones with everyone in the year at the moment, just working my way through, making sure that people know what they need to know. Support and career sessions, identifying application criteria. And the pupil responsibilities, notice that I've put that there as well. Identify application criteria. You need to know what they require. So you need to research universities and work experience opportunities. You need to visit universities or attend virtual open days if possible. Setting up your UCAS account. Autumn term, again, supporting the personal statement drafting process, advising on choices and options, completion of school references, sending off applications. The personal statement, by the way, the process for that is usually you complete your first draft, you show it to your tutor, they give you some feedback. You show it to the most relevant subject teacher, they give you some feedback, and then it comes to me. And quite often they come to me and a great big red lines go through them when we really break them down. I've been doing this job for 7 years here, and I had quite a lot of experience in my previous school of these personal statements. You lot are the last year to do personal statements, by the way. Next year, they're probably changing. My aim is that if you, I use Teams messages. If you send me a Teams message with your current draft of personal statement, my aim is that I get it back to you within 48 hours. And I will say this to parents, and I'll say this to you students as well. Do not be afraid to nag me. Okay. If I have not got it back to you within 24 hours, I am an English teacher. I often have lots of marking. I can't always reply within 24 hours. If you just send me a full stop, you have gone back on the top of my radar. Okay. And sometimes some things will be sent on Wednesday and I'll get back to you on Saturday. And generally, if you haven't got a really close deadline, that's fine. Obviously, you have a deadline coming up, then Wednesday will be replied to by Thursday, of course. But don't be afraid to nag me. It's my job next term. So summer holidays, further research into universities is really important. Discussions with family, really important. Work experience, wider reading, and preparing draft of personal statement. Now, in terms of our philosophy and principles, all advice has to be tailored to the individual receiving it. Context is key. So advice that I give to one person is not the same as what I will give to another student. And please be wary of taking advice from each other. because what I have said to John does not apply to Jane. And it's really important that you're getting the right advice. So be wary of that. We really do not push an agenda. So there are school figures on the percentage going to Russell Group universities, etc. Russell Group are kind of, some of the most competitive universities, often the most reputable universities. It's not a consideration when talking to an individual. Neither has there ever been any pressure applied to me to increase the number of applicants going to Russell Group universities. It is not a consideration. And that's a really important thing to know, because it is a requirement that we are impartial. And I am not partial to which university you go to. And anecdotally, yes, there's been lots of students, lots of our strongest students have had Russell Group offers and have chosen to go to a non-Russell Group university for the reasons of that course is better for me. And there is no argument for me in those cases. Non-university routes are valid and vital. I put that word parity in there. They are as valid and as vital as university routes. And non-UK routes are supported. Those work in a more ad hoc basis. I had a student applying to Ireland about 7 years ago. They have a very different application procedure. And as I understand it, it seemed to be one lady working in an office somewhere who never answered the phone. In the end, I rang Cork University, and the admissions tutor of Cork University was a lovely lady. I said, I've been trying to get through to the Irish UCAS, to which she replied, oh, she's never in. And then the admissions tutor of Cork University was able to very lucidly talk me through everything we needed to do, and off went a successful application. So if you're applying for a non-university UK route, that's fine. America, we do every year. Your future is your own. You need to research it really carefully. And it really isn't any good expecting someone else to know the things that really are going to affect you. Studying something you can passionately be interested in for 3 years is probably a good use of your time. I'll talk about the big shift. Obviously, it's finance. When people are paying £9,000 a year for something, it's much more of a financial transaction than for most of us adults in the room. If we went to university, for most of us, it will have been free or almost free. So you're much more likely to do something you're just interested in. I still think that's perfectly valid. Okay. Something I have in mind is this idea of who are you going to become in 5 years? Or as I'm getting older, who are you going to become in 20 years? And that's often a little bit of a thing that I have in my mind when I'm talking to young people, and how those university routes are going to guide you. It's something that I encourage you to have in mind as well. I also have in mind this principle that chance minor happenings dictate much of what happens in life. Little throwaway comments that any member of staff can make can really sort of steer someone in one direction or another. And in my position, that, of course, I'm sure happens quite a lot, but I don't worry too much about it because that's just how life works. The head of drama at UWE, very, very successful, very widely respected. He got into drama as a young man because a pretty girl was handing out posters to do some acting. And his entire career, which was hugely successful, internationally renowned, was based on the fact that he saw a pretty girl one time. That's how life works. I try to be responsible with that. I try to sort of make sure that I'm not making some throwaway comment that's going to close a door that should remain open. But these things do happen. And indeed, where you go to university, often whim is part of it. And that's kind of okay, because if you're living life well, you make the best of where you're going. Some of the big changes in recent years, obviously university fees. Now, I've noticed this here, and it's a national issue, post-COVID deadline drift. I've talked about deadlines becoming officially later. That is because people were missing them. They weren't missing them here. Some of those people not missing them were not missing them by the skin of their teeth. Okay. But that post-COVID deadline drift is a thing. We also have post-COVID uncertainty and mind changing. The one thing I will say about that is don't worry too much this time next year, or 3 weeks ago, this time next year. Don't worry too much about whether you've applied to business or law, because you need to focus on your A-levels. If you decide that you've applied to the wrong course, we'll sort that out later. The deadlines have already passed, so we're in a different state anyway. So if you start changing your mind in May, leave it. We'll sort it out later. Hello.
Take a year out with the procedure of it, you know, do they still offer you a place and then you can do it a year out? How does it work?
So if you want deferred entry, you apply and you can tick a box for a deferred entry, and that's, yeah, so you apply as if you're applying for this year, but you tick a box for deferred entry. Yeah. And again, if you really change your mind and you've applied and you're planning on a gap year anyway, well, then we sort it out next September. And by the way, every year ex-students will get in touch with me and want support with a reapplication, and that's fine. So if that's what happens, that's what happens. So this idea of universities, finance and therefore job security requirements, there is a real desire amongst Gen Z for clear pathways. And it's a bit of a funny one, because really engineering, dentistry, medicine, veterinary science, nursing, law, those are about the only vocational ones I can think of off the top of my head. Things in IT, obviously. But so then your degrees like psychology, even your degrees like business, well, everyone works for business in some way or other. So lots of those, you know, traditional sort of arts type degrees, social science type degrees, people say, well, what am I going to do with that? Well, you're going to learn a load of stuff, you're going to become very clever, and then you're going to find a job like everyone else. So, but there is a real desire to think, right, I'm spending £30,000 in fees on this. What job does it qualify me to do? And often it's going to, well, it qualifies you to enter a universe of employment. Another thing, there is a decline in early applications. Fewer students nationally applying for those more competitive things with the October deadlines for some reason. There is an effect of strikes, negative publicity on things like nursing and medicine. Combined subjects are increasingly popular, which I think is a really good thing, by the way. And increased applications. There are more people applying for university. That's a demographic shift. There are more people your age. 5 years ago, it was glorious. Everyone just got into their first choice. And we had 2 years of that because there was a smaller cohort of students. So universities were hungry for them. Now there's a bigger cohort of students. So I'm afraid it's a little bit more competitive for you guys than it was in 2018. I want to talk briefly about student finance. I'm sorry, I have my phone. I'm just checking the time to make sure I run to time. I have here, this is basically, don't worry too much about all of these figures, but this is basically where you'll be, how much you pay back on your student loan. So if you are making £26,000, you pay £0. If you are making £33,600, you will pay that year £466. If you are making 37 grand almost, you will pay £850 a month. Now, as young people, those figures might not mean much to you, but as someone who earns money, I can tell you this. If you're earning £37,000, 850 quid a year that comes straight out of your paycheck without you having to do anything about it is nothing. I mean, it's not nothing, it's 850 quid, but in the grand scheme of things, it's easily affordable. It's, you know, it's 80 quid a month. You can afford that. I paid back my student loan at a higher rate than that. And I have to say, at one point, I was paying £130 a month in repayments, and I was earning enough money that they said, oh, you've only got 3 months left, and that's going to be a bit complicated for us due to fiscal years, etc., etc. And I said, you poor dear things, just have the rest of it now. And I didn't notice the difference the following month. You know, so I think about it as a graduate tax. And it's really not too bad of a graduate tax. This funky little graph here, over the course, and this is, by the way, this is not a very high earning person, okay? But this person from that previous graph, over the course of their life between 2020 and 2050-ish, they will pay back a total of less than £30,000, i.e. less than they borrowed, and then it's written off. Their actual total debt, because of interest, etc., never paid off. And you have to be earning really quite a lot of money to pay back that total debt. Now, as parents, and especially as parents of the private school, there may be ideas around, okay, so how much of our, how much do we contribute to all of these things? I would say house deposits, and leave you to think about that, because for the last 50 years, if you can give your child a deposit for a house and they can leave with some easily repayable debt when they finish university, that will have had a much more beneficial effect on their life. Now, we don't know what will happen with the housing markets. So over the last 50 years, that would have been great advice. I don't know about the next 50 years. I don't think I have anything else to say about that. I thought I did, but never mind. So it's important that I've got a few criteria for you to think about when we're talking about university courses. One of them is the Teaching Excellence Framework. That came out in 2018, I believe. It's new, and most universities, and especially traditional universities, are ranked significantly on their research. Now, what research someone is doing doesn't necessarily affect the student experience. The quality of the teaching does. And you'll often find that newer universities, less competitive universities, have much better ratings on the Teaching Excellence Framework than more traditional and more competitive universities. That's not always the case, but it might be something that you want to consider. Look at modes of assessment carefully when applying. I had a student several years ago who wanted to apply for all of the top universities for her subject. And she was a student who needed significant access arrangements in terms of her assessment. Now, she was going to leave with the equivalent of a few A's and A stars, but she was not taking traditional A-level subjects. And Exeter University was one of them. Exeter University assessments would not have enabled her to be successful. I encouraged her to ring Brighton University. When she spoke to Brighton University, they said, right, if you need this access arrangement for this particular module, we can arrange this. You can do a Viva, you can do a verbal exam rather than a written exam. So lots of newer universities will have greater flexibility around these things. And I'm quoting someone that I met at a conference, and he said this quite publicly. He was from Bath University. Universities will not have the luxury of saying as they are when it comes to assessment. There have been some quite high-profile cases and quite tragic cases to do with student mental health and the pressure around assessments. And when a coroner's report says this person was incredibly stressed because of this and this, and the university did nothing about it, we are likely to see a shift in how all universities assess. But at present, some universities will have terminal exams at the end of third year, which will account for 80% of your grades. And some universities will have more modular assessment. And you need to know yourself well enough to think what's going to be best for you. And of course, we know you pretty well too. And I and subject teachers can help guide along those lines. Entry requirements, it's an obvious one, but it's an important filter used by universities. A-level predictions and GCSE results. Okay, one is a prediction, one is a fact. Do they have required subjects? Do they have required GCSE grades? So psychology is quite a common example. Lots of universities will require a grade 7 in maths GCSE. They don't need maths A-level, but they do need to see an A equivalent for maths GCSE for you to be able to access their course, because psychology has lots of maths in it. I'm going to come back to this last bit in a bit. Location. Do you want to live in a campus university or a city university? Those kind of considerations. You might have a sense that, you know, if you live somewhere near here, you shouldn't go anywhere within that red circle, because then you'll be too close to home and your parents will have to do your laundry, all that kind of thing. And you don't necessarily want to go anywhere outside of that circle, because once it gets to be a 5-hour drive, that's far too much trouble. That is a bit of a family matter, I think, but it's something to discuss with, amongst the family, to see if there are some limits or requirements when it comes to location. And for some students, somewhere within that red circle is more appropriate. You need to look at the specifics of modules on offer. You need to look at modes for assessment. So, for example, I went to University of East Anglia. Now I'm from Devon, so it's a long way away. It's a 6 hour drive. And people from Devon haven't really heard of University of East Anglia. So people in the east of England have heard of it and think it's very good. A lot of my old school friends said, oh dear, why did you go there? You got 3 A's. There weren't A stars in those days. Well, I went there because they were one of 2 universities that offered creative writing at that stage. And I wanted to study creative writing at university. So knowing whether it's going to meet your needs and meet your interests is a really important thing. Reputation of the institution. Now, there's various definitions of reputation. You might think about earning potential, but graduates with a good degree from less prestigious university tend to earn more than those with low-class degrees at more prestigious universities, i.e., according to some research, a 2-2 from Oxford will earn you less than a first-class degree from Bath Spa. Potentially. So look into those things about earning potential. There was an interesting study by the, I meant to dig it out. There's an interesting study that implied that actually what university you go to at all really doesn't make that much difference. And a lot of the cultural capital that you gain throughout your childhood is what really seems to make the difference in terms of earning potential. Institutional culture. Our most popular university, and this is not because I push it, is Oxford Brookes. And I think what happens here is 5 years ago, a couple of our ex-girls went to Oxford Brookes and had an amazing time. And being a small school and quite a tight-knit school, people stay in touch. So every year, Oxford Brookes gets excellent publicity of what a lovely time everyone is having there. So that institutional culture, a word of mouth reputation. Farmers Weekly, Harper Adams tops global ranking for employer reputation. You might not have heard of Harper Adams University. The landscape has really changed. Universities are no longer the sorting hat that they were 50 years ago. It's no longer the case that employers will only, 50 years ago, some employers would only interview people who went to Oxbridge. They wouldn't look at other candidates. Can't do that anymore. It is an anachronism. Are some people still terribly old-fashioned? Yes. Are some of those people major employers? Yes. So will there be some employers who will look vastly more favorably upon an old university or an ancient university? Absolutely. But that is less and less the case as time moves on. Now, if I think about how much time we've got left, well, that's 15 minutes-ish. Do you want to talk for about 10 minutes? Okay. I'm not going to go through all of these slides because it's hot and we're going to get sort of tired and bored. But I am going to make this available to you and you can have a little look through it yourself. But I just want to sort of some of the highlights from a 2018 conference. Obviously, that's pre-COVID. But it just hints at some of the changes that were happening in the landscape. So, yeah, this is the old-fashioned view. The best students need to specialize at a Russell Group university. As I say, that is less and less obviously the case. So there's a lot of combined arts and that kind of thing going on in terms of university offerings. Just to be aware of this, and this is from 2014, this data, and it's really hard to nail employability data, by the way. It's really hard to know exactly what figures mean what, because you start having to look at tax codes, etc. Well, lots of the very most successful people don't sully their hands with paying tax, which muddies the figures somewhat. But humanities and social sciences seem to be less employable than STEM subjects, which seem to be less employable than economics and business subjects. And you can see the more competitive the university, there are those positive influences on employability rates. But as I say, that data is now 10 years old and it's always changing. This will be broad, absolutely. This will be broadly true. In terms of employability, economics and business is the most employable and also the most munificent. It's a fancy way of saying best paid, I think. STEM, again, more employable than humanities and social sciences. I am a arts humanities type graduate. I'm an English literature graduate, so I'm absolutely not saying don't do arts degrees. Do them, they're great. But you know, just so you're aware, and again, you can see the competitiveness of this. There are different waves of institution. You've got the ancient universities, St Andrews and Oxbridge, etc. The red brick universities, that's generally the Russell Group ones, mainly founded in the 19th century. Then you've got the plate glass universities. They're founded around the 1950s, places like University of East Anglia. Then you have what used to be called polytechnics. Okay, and often if it has city in its name, not always, but often if it has city or metropolitan in its name, it's an old polytechnic university. And then you have the new universities. A lot of really interesting stuff is happening at these newer universities. Those older universities, they're great. I have nothing against them whatsoever. But as I say, the teaching quality tends to be better in these universities. And there tends to be more innovation. If you want to do a slightly funkier subject or a more specialist subject, newer universities tend to be at the cutting edge because they can afford to be. Whereas the ancient universities are slightly, they are established and they are doing what they're established for doing. So please, as parents, do not write off ex-polytechnic universities because they might well be the best place for your child to go. I'm going to skip through here a little bit. Internship is a thing to bear in mind, but that's more for later, to be honest. There are new methods of screening. So this idea of degree blindness is worth bearing in mind. And you can look through these slides later if you're interested. But the key point to take away is that universities don't have the same criteria that they did 50 years ago when it comes to choosing whom they're going to employ. Okay. Anyway, but yes, the idea that foxes versus hedgehogs. Hedgehog is a specialist and the fox can do a range of things. New graduates who can solve complex problems are increasingly needed in an increasingly sort of complex and multifaceted world. Okay. ratemyapprenticeship.co.uk is a really important website. So that's one of the first ports of call. Unifrog as well, of course. But looking into apprenticeships is really important. And something I should have added that to the changes. Apprenticeships are different. So can you be an apprentice plumber, builder, etc.? Yes, that still exists, although much less so. It's much less convenient for a builder to take on an apprentice than it used to be. So they don't do it as much anymore. Whereas degree apprenticeships are now increasingly popular. So a degree apprenticeship will be usually working at university 2 days a week and working for a big employer 3 days a week. Sometimes it will be 6-week placements at university interspersed with working. They're a phenomenal option and they are the most competitive option. So I've got some just little case studies. 2022, our brightest student in the year obtained a degree apprenticeship for Unilever. So that was where our brightest student went at first. 2021, someone reapplied and secured a place at Oxford for Arabic and Islamic studies. The previous year, she had applied for politics and had not even received an offer of interview. In 2020, school leaver rang me up in the summer holidays and said, "Oh, Mr. Mew, you're going to say I told you so." And I said, "Oh, my favorite." And one of the things I say to young people is, if you want to really challenge yourself with your gap year, if you want to really learn about the human condition, it's all very well swanning off to Borneo and building a bridge that quite often gets taken down after you leave so that more Europeans can come and pay through the nose to build a bridge. That happens quite a lot. You won't learn an awful lot about the human condition there, necessarily. Whereas if you challenge yourself to go to a deprived area of this country, they'll speak English. And they won't necessarily thank you for being there. And you will really learn something about yourself rather than the cliche of going off to Africa or Madagascar and saying, oh, they had nothing, but they were so happy because you've seen these big smiles. And this student went to Brixton and worked as a youth volunteer for 9 months, got on really well. And she rang me up and said, someone said blah, 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 and then repeated what I said. And I said, yes, that was me. She said, oh, I thought it might have been. Anyway, I want to be a social worker now. And is now a social worker. 2018, our highest performer, A star, A. She received 4 rejections. She applied for politics and said, sod it. Went to the Netherlands, studied a liberal arts type degree. It's rather a different structure they have there. International studies and politics was the major. She's now working for the EU in Vienna. So just some case studies of interesting, different things that people do and being aware of that. Now, just to be aware, you get 5 choices for UCAS. And it's the same personal statement for all courses. So your personal statement has to be similar. Business or business with economics, fine. Cognitive neuroscience or history, less fine. And it should look like this. You should have a long shot. You should have an aspirational one, and then a couple of fairly secure ones and an absolutely safe one. That's generally the spread of your applications. I think 100% success rate for applications at a school is probably a bad thing. I think if everyone's got into everywhere they've applied, I've actually not pushed people enough. I think everyone's played it too safe. And I'll say that now. And it might be that on results day, some people go through clearing. And that's okay. Just so you're aware, so if you don't get you will choose in fact, next slide, here we go. So let's imagine that the long shot has not made an offer, and then you've been given these offers here. You might choose this. Your firm choice is your aspirational. By the way, your teachers are saying you're probably going to get BBB. So your insurance choice is your BBB. All other offers are then null. You can't choose your firm and insurance and then say to your absolutely safe university, oh, you dear old things, can I still come? No, you've stopped that now. So you need to, that's a really careful choice. And again, it's one that happens around May, possibly before. You as parents need to be involved in that decision. I like to be involved in that decision. You need to speak to your teachers just to make sure, look, I think I'm going to get AAA. Am I right? If not, then we might need to be a little bit realistic. Post-sixth form pathways, not in order of importance, by the way. Most people go to a UK university. Some people go to an international university, degree apprenticeship, something I'd like people to be looking into. Full-time employment and or training, internship, or a gap year. As parents, I would just like to say, people who do gap years academically outperform people who do not do gap years. Okay, so if you're having a discussion with your child about whether or not they can do a gap year because you don't want them to forget how to read, the evidence is completely stacked against you. It's not a valid argument. And then a TLDR, which is too long, didn't read for those of you who aren't quite so down with the kids as me. Personal statements will need to be drafted over the summer holidays with wider reading, please. Universities want to see a genuine interest demonstrated through wider reading and work experience. Students should have a clear idea about what they wish to apply for and a short list of institutions by the end of the summer holidays. UCAS applications should be sent off before Christmas. And Mr. Muse, in charge of the process, please keep me in the loop. And you as parents, generally tutors will be first port of call, of course, but if you want to make me the first port of call, fine. I'm very happy to have individual conversations. That happens every year that there'll be often there's a real argument between a child and a parent, and there's a real sense of loggerheads. Actually, all coming into the same room and making sure we're all on the same page means that we give absolutely the right advice to the student. And sometimes it's a case of we as a school say, as a parent, you're absolutely right. Yes, that's a really good insight into your child. This is now a good way forwards. And sometimes as a parent, you say, that's a really good insight into my child. And now I agree that this is the way forwards. But if you want to have discussions with us, please do, because we're all stakeholders in this. I've got a better looking one for you, Mrs. Ash. So I'm going to hand over to Mrs. Ash now. And if you've got any questions after Mrs. Ash has spoken, I'll come back up.
Oh, I'll try not to make this too long because I don't know about you. Oh, actually, it's all right here. I can see why Mr. Mew was talking so long. But having just been sat there, I do understand why you are all melting. Here we go. So we obviously put an awful lot of emphasis in year 12 and 13 on the UCAS process. And we do that because it's what the majority of people will end up going on to do, what the majority of our students end up going on to do. And it's also a very complicated process to go through, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other pathways that we very much support and have expertise in supporting you with. So the 4 things on the board here, whenever I teach a new group of pupils for careers, I always start by saying there's actually 5 things that you can realistically do once you leave school. University being one of them, going off for an apprenticeship, just getting a job, because by then you don't have to be in education, you can just go and get a job. You could have a gap year, or you could run your own business if you so wish. And I've taught plenty of people over the years who have bitten the bullet when they're young. There's less risk involved when you're starting a business when you're young. So there's absolutely no reason why you can't do that. I mean, there is a 6th option, which is to sit at home and play Xbox for the next 5 years where you still work out what you want to do. But we wouldn't have done our jobs if we had made you fall into that category. So it's really important that all of you out there are looking at the alternatives as well as UCAS. You will chop and change your minds 1,000,000 times between now and this time next year. And then you will spend the summer second guessing yourselves as well, wondering if you've picked the right subject, if uni's really for you, if you should have done the gap year. It's okay. I didn't know I wanted to go to uni until results day, which was the day before my 18th birthday. And then my mum and dad freaked out because that was never on the agenda. But it's absolutely okay to just change your mind at the last minute. But the best way to prepare yourselves for those eventualities is to understand all the different routes. So in November, I think it's the 16th of November, we are holding what we're going to call an alternative routes day. So we will have apprenticeship employers coming in, as well as apprenticeship agencies. We will have specialists from universities that help you apply for American universities or other universities abroad. And hopefully it will give you all an opportunity to hear a little bit more about these alternative routes and help support those discussions. But what's super important is, if you are sat here thinking, I'm not 100% sure about university, or even if you are thinking I'm 100% sure about university, but I also want to know about those next steps. What do graduate jobs look like? How am I going to apply for those things? Can I get the support through school to help me feel like I know what I'm looking for when I get to uni for the next steps there as well? Come and talk to us about those as well, okay? You will probably feel, if you are one of those people within school who are a bit 50-50 about university, you will possibly feel like the pressure is on you to make the application for university. We always say make the application anyway, because you've got then the option, because you will chop and change your mind. But it doesn't mean that you can't be also applying for degree apprenticeships at the same time. So there are lots of other things that you can be doing. As I said, the apprenticeships fair is going to be in November. Well, I'm also doing a talk for all the pupils during the tutorial one-to-one week about the mechanics of apprenticeships, the different levels, the different types of subjects that you might study towards an apprenticeship in, because not all of them are degree apprenticeships, and that's absolutely fine. Some people will go in at a lower level and potentially build themselves up. You can also utilise Unifrog, and parents, there is a parental login that we will send you so that you can access Unifrog as well, so that you can see what the children are seeing. And that can also be really great over the summer for when you're constructing those conversations and really thinking about the different options for everybody. And for you, apprenticeships specifically, the gov.uk website has the vast majority of apprenticeships, but not all of them. So some businesses, in fact, there are many smaller businesses who do not advertise that they are offering apprenticeships. So if you're particularly interested in getting an apprenticeship, or you wanted to particularly work at a certain business, then it's worth approaching them, because they will often tailor an apprenticeship to the candidate. I know this firsthand because my husband's business does it all the time. So they never advertise their apprenticeships. They literally look out there for certain candidates, and then they say, okay, what, you're interested in marketing? Right, let's tailor this apprenticeship now to marketing for you. And make it work for you. So there's a lot of things that actually aren't advertised out there, and that's why you need to talk to people who can help and support you through that. You can also go directly through an agency or through a university, and we will have a couple of agencies and a university at the apprenticeship day that you can speak to as well. There are different levels to apprenticeships, but I'm going to tell the pupils all about that. And then if any of you are interested or have got extra questions, then you can come and see me after or at a later point, because we need to crack on with the parents' evening appointments. And I'm sure you're all going to need a cup of tea after this. The world of work is quite scary for some pupils. Trying to get work experience now is a really good idea. Getting yourself familiar with what it feels like to work in different environments outside of our Western bubble, which is a bit of a bubble. Get yourselves out there, get some part-time work, start thinking about what sectors you might find yourself working in. As I say to everybody, your generation are likely to have 3 or 4 different careers, not just, different jobs, different actual careers. So don't get too hung up about it right now. Perfectly fine. It's all about having transferable skills, and that work experience will help you do that. Let's build on the networking. We've got a business networking event in October, which will give you an opportunity to start developing some of those skills. And I'm also going to work on some LinkedIn sessions with you in one of our Monday Light sessions, so that you can start building a professional social media presence, okay? Not the kind of place where you post what you're going to be doing tonight or tomorrow. Self-employment, as I say, is something that you really can consider at your age. We had Callum in a few months ago talking about the 5 businesses that he owns at the age of 23. He went off and did a degree, got a first in Bath, but he's known his whole life he's never wanted to work for anybody, and he is out there running businesses and doing it for himself. If he can do it, there's absolutely no reason why any of you can't do it too. So if you want to know more about that, obviously come and speak to me. And we will have some talks from some specialists on gap years, which will also be part of the alternative routes thing as well. So make your gap years count, okay? Let's just make sure that you are planning. If you are going to do that gap year, it might be great for you academically afterwards, but also let's just make sure that that gap year really counts for you, and you're not sat around at home sort of dipping in and out of things and not really getting anything productive from it. That's everything from me. Mr. Mew, did you have a final say?
No, if you do put through that, there's no question to go through every year. Someone who doesn't apply, you will get in touch and after years and say, how did you cancel?
Yeah.
So we just ask that you mention that how you cancel by going through the motion. So yes,
perfect. Right, I'm available for most of the evening. I've only got a couple of appointments tonight, so if you've got any questions, you are welcome to come and see me. I will be over in the Walled Garden, probably in Walled Garden 8, but I will mill around. I think we all probably need to get out and get some fresh air and a bit of refreshment before we start those academic conversations. So thank you very much for your time. That's the Garden Sixth Bar, so you can make your way over to the bar.
I've got a
Without
couple of parents evening appointments, so I need to around sort of moving around. So if you want to catch me in the next sort of 15 minutes, 20 minutes, catch me then. Otherwise, I'll be hanging around the courtyard if you want to ask any personal questions.
Oh, that is
It's hot in here, yes. Right, end. There we go. End meeting.